Real questions, real answers for real life. Come on in and pull up a chair. You're at 1850 Main Street with Michael DelGiorno and David Zanotti.
Today we're looking at a few stories that all take us to the same question. This fall, are we going to experience another shadow campaign to save democracy?
So we had 4 different segments on your morning show that I think we need to discuss further. One was a New York Times inside the GOP plan for early voting, which we've talked about at great length. The Democrats always do this better. The mail-in vote, the early vote, they start every election with a huge lead. GOP likes to traditionally get out on election day. That kind of tied with the turning point and the massive amount of money. I say massive. It's not massive compared to what the Democrats have to chase the vote. And then I think the two that you often talk about, the Arizona abortion, they're going to weaponize abortion this time around, just like they weaponized COVID last time around, and how they love to get into our campuses, pay students, and get them out to find ballots and get them to the ballot box. The trick is, this time they plan to do it with our tax dollars. I mean, David, 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 does not equal 4, and it's about 1,000. I told you so.
Well, and what's amazing about this is, you mentioned this on your morning show, it feels like this is the shadow campaign to save the democracy part 2. All right?
Mm-hmm.
Here we go. We're now seeing the paragraph outline for what you're going to read about after the election, how this group of people got together and decided they would have to save the democracy again, which meant electing Joe Biden. And these are the steps that they went through to get it to happen. Now, what's remarkable about all of this is Biden's not even in the process. This is all about
Doesn't need
the
to be.
moving.
He was in a basement last time.
The moving parts. And you and I have been having this Kennedy conversation. So, and now you're in my head with Kennedy. There's this documentary we've been talking about, where we'll talk about more, I'm sure, but that's out on Prime. Kennedy, a President Betrayed. And it reminds me of some of the coursework that I did with Dr. Allen at Ashland University in the Masters of History and Government program. And watching Dr. Allen teach in that environment, and particularly it reminds me of the studies on the Cold War. Because the Cold War, if you decided to study it based upon original source materials, you get to go back and there's like a binder that's, I'd say about 6 inches thick of coursework. And it's newspaper articles, editorials, presidential speeches, speeches from the floor of the Senate, speeches from Berlin, speeches from Moscow. And you get to read all of this and get to the actual events as they were happening, as they were unfolding. Well, when you put all that together and you get a documentary going on it, it suddenly makes you realize how public policy works. Like, for example, how the Soviets would listen to Kennedy's speeches and they would discern not what he said, but they discerned what he didn't say. And what he didn't say is what they decided that's what he really meant. And there was all these moving parts. But my point in bringing that up was that Kennedy was in charge. Now, he was surrounded by people who were desperately trying to run everything around him. It looks a lot like the current administration right now. All these players are doing everything. But Kennedy wasn't sitting in a basement. Kennedy wasn't eating ice cream cones. He was battling to control the administration and to have his vision implemented in American foreign policy.
Or to say it this way, and we will have this discussion at great length, if John F. Kennedy did not say no, we would be in a much different place. If somebody else were allowed to run, or he would have listened, even with their credibility, even with the titles that they had he not listened to himself and listened to them, America, well, history would have been much different. So, but there's no one stopping. So what we presume is it is the Podesta machine that's really calling the shots. But you always say something, and as we're doing the overview for this, and then we'll just go in depth in each of them. You're always talking about how the Republicans are always, because I can tell you they're exactly 4 years behind this time. So, here's turning point with $100 million. to try to address what they did to them 4 years ago, and you're already behind what they're getting ready to do with you to an abortion and at the campus. So they're always behind and they never seem to catch up.
It's an interesting thing about the Republican view of life, and it's one that, I mean, if you think about it, our Constitution itself talks about the fact that part of the responsibility of the federal government to the states is to make certain that there is a Republican form of government provided to the states, afforded to the states. In other words, if a dictator were to rise up in a specific state and suddenly begin to defy all the laws of the United States Constitution and the state constitution, the federal government could get involved based upon constitutional principles.
Right.
So the reality is that we're supposed to have a Republican or representative form of government, which and part of that philosophy is limited government. Part of the philosophy is government only does this much because we do all the rest, and we're constantly trying to make sure that government doesn't get outside its boundaries because now they're in our front yard. So what a more Republican point of view almost always is, and a conservative view would go along with this, as would a libertarian, let's have as little government as we can so we can get on to doing the things that matter a whole lot more in life than government. That's not the way Democrats look at the world.
No.
Progressives believe government is their religion, and that at the certain processes of government are virtually sacraments to them. They derive their sense of meaning in their core identity from their relationship with government. That's why Trump derangement syndrome is so real.
Exactly. By the way, can I say it a different way that might inflame some people? All right. So communism and socialism have a lot of interaction and similarities in terms of how you take from one's means and provide other. Communism is different than socialism. Socialism is a government middleman deciding who they take from and who they give to. Communism starts controlling businesses. So they're different. Actually, what Democrats have become today is far more Islamic. I know this is going to sound crazy that it just came out of my lips and you're hearing it, but it is. Islam is a form of life, a system of government. And it is a form of worship, but it covers everything in life. And in that sense, they're more like it. So, but how does this translate to what we're talking about? Republicans would probably most be willing to, hey, let's just go back to a piece of paper and a pencil and vote.
Yeah, exactly.
And only on election day. Do you know how unthinkable that would be for anybody on the left? And because we're thinking, all we're doing is electing people, and you got paper, you can count it, you can go back and count it again. But for Democrats, nothing can be left to chance. Losing is not possible. Imagine,
recovering
David,
from a loss is not possible, right?
It's impossible.
The end of the world.
Imagine if in the voting process of a nation, I could lose the essence of my worship and beliefs, which is untouchable, as you know. Government does that. God did that. His word does that. His Holy Spirit does it daily. But I think you're right to say they have conflated all these views, whether it's the views of multiculturalism, because without government controlling multiculturalism, they don't know how to process our human differences or past injustices. Same thing for gender, same thing for sex, for everything. It really is conflated more like Islam, I think, than it is even socialism and communism, which maybe I don't even have the degrees to have that conversation, but I have that discernment.
Well, socialism is, in essence, the worldview, the philosophy that empowers a form of government, statism, that becomes communism, because ultimately socialism doesn't work, because you can't have socialism is this naive, dysfunctional imagination that the people can basically, if there's enough equality and there's enough standards of equality, and all I can think of is back in the Portland, Oregon days, and the different cities that were underneath all of this crazy stuff going on with Occupy Wall Street, that there was no more clapping, it was just snapping of fingers. Okay, yeah, the whole socialism notion that we can all sit together in a park and snap our fingers and control everything. Well, that's a really naive, lovely little idea if people were perfect, but they're not perfect. And so what ends up happening is someone has to arise with enough force to control the situation. Now we're into communism. One inevitably leads to the next, the practical application. So what we're talking about here is in this election, there are elements that must win no matter what. That the president, that doesn't matter what Democrat we're talking about. Whatever Democrat is the nominee is the controlled entity of these elements. Barack Obama was a controlled entity. Now, you could say that in some cases, Republicans can be controlled entities too, based upon certain money power groups. That's possible as well. But in the size of the administrative state that we have right now, the vested interest that people have, then how in the world can you actually be the president of the United States? You're really just the front for the movement behind the president of the United States. So that what I'm always talking about, we kind of laugh about together, is that John Podesta is the longest serving president in the history of the United States. He's always there. And who's he representing? He's representing George Soros. And this is what drives me crazy, Michael. You would think somebody in the media, in the vast American media, would start to talk about this out loud. Now, I think Glenn Beck was probably one of the first people who ever talked about it. But in 2003, when Podesta was exiled out of the White House and the Clinton administration, he started a new organization called the Center for American Progress, founded with George Soros, a 501c3 education and research think tank in Washington, D.C. Now, you got to ask yourself, what kind of chutzpah does a person have to start a think tank in Washington, D.C., designed to influence the highest levels of American public policy with an international globalist financier who believes in open borders like George Soros? What on earth? You know what? He could have cared less. They have been running that town since 2003.
Yeah.
No apologies. And then every now and then they give you a little peek behind the window and they show you in the shadow campaign to save the democracy what they've really been up to and what they've really been doing. And then you get online, you start to track the contributions between the clubs, the billionaires clubs, and then you realize is they are spending billions of dollars, these cluster groups, to control who's in the White House. This is not a conspiracy. So you talk about going back to paper and pencil.
Well, conspiracy in plain sight, if it's anything, right?
Yeah. And so what are the odds of ever going back to paper and pencil as long as Silicon Valley is pushing, just like that was talked about in the movie The Circle, when they're pushing for an ultimate voting arrangement where you vote from your phone.
Online.
Yeah. All right. And that's the way to get it done. What are the odds?
When you subscribe to 1850 Main Street, you're the first to find out what's happening next with new guests, publications, and events. And when you spread the word about 1850 Main Street, you're helping others find real answers to the real questions facing America right now. To learn more, visit 1850mainstreet.com. And please, tell a friend.
But don't you think it's worse than that in that, and again, there would be two things we'd have to dust out. One, what is their end game? Is it to present America no longer an economic military superpower, a sovereignty, to a global governance at the table of a global governance? This is where I think it's more Islamic in that it's not just policy debate and differences. When it comes to global warming, like when it came to COVID, like it comes with same-sex marriage, like it comes with abortion, it's enshrined. If it's over, it's not debatable. You can't both coexist. It's got to be our way or no way. And then there are systems in life and rules for those systems of life intermingled with it. And so at the end of the day, you're left with this is their God and this is their form of worship. It's also their form of government, and it has to be so. That's why if you said to me, we're going to lose democracy tomorrow, I still have a Lord and Savior. I still have a kingdom for eternity to come. They lose this. They don't know how to exist.
Well,
they have
if somebody says to me, we're going to lose democracy tomorrow, I'm going to say, first off, we never had it. So what have we lost?
Never had one.
And
that aside, you know what I'm saying, though.
And someone said to me, well, this is so. The point of all of this is the electoral policies, the electoral processes are all designed for one thing, and that's to maintain power. And all of these, and again, Joe Biden is simply the front man. Barack Obama was simply the front man. And that's why, and this is not to be construed in any way, shape, or form as an endorsement for anybody, but that is why the establishment progressive left is terrified both of Trump and of RFK Jr. because they could not control either of those entities in the White House if they secured that place.
And it's not just power for the kicks of power and for feeding their own wealth. It is for the purposes of control and enshrining their beliefs and their vision, right?
And all the people that are in charge of this, who are basically doing their will through politics, basically you're not going to find any traditional thinkers in regards to faith and freedom. You're not going to find people that are advocating for a biblical worldview, whether they come from a Jewish or Christian perspective. What you're going to find is flat earth, materialist globalists. This is their worldview. They have every right to it. They have every single right to it. All right. But what the point is proven over and over and again, that when you lose God from the equation of governance, you lose man. That always has happened in every form of socialism or communism. And then the body count begins to rise because you can't have people of conscience objecting when you're basically creating a flat earth and the people in power are the only ones who matter.
So having done all the heady stuff, now let's take them one at a time. Let me play you like a piano for a second.
Okay.
So joining this scenario already in progress, here comes the New York Times with inside the GOP's plan for early voting. Well, when it comes to mail-in voting and the weaponization of COVID, they griped, but they didn't engage. And mail-in voting continues to some degree. Early voting continues. Now you're going to get involved in early voting. Can that even the score? Can you do it like they do it?
And who's the involvement? Is it a Republican-led national party with huge contributions coming in from industries and individuals? No, it's a $100 million promise of funding to Charlie Kirk and Turning Point to go onto college campuses and to create a phone app-based infrastructure. I mean, look, Rob Portman ran the McCain campaign's project called Norwal. This was going to be the answer to what Biden did to them the prior election. No, he was running Romney's campaign. It was going to be what they did, when Obama shocked the world and beat McCain. It was all technology. We finally spent $2 billion. So the Republicans were going to respond 4 years later. And Rob Portman, Senator Portman from Ohio, is in charge of this thing. Well, the system completely collapsed three days out before the election, and they got smashed again by the Obama machine.
And now 8 years later,
they're going to give Charlie Kirk $100 million in a phone and say, "Go
try
fix
again
this.
with an app.
Go fix this, Charlie." And
meanwhile, they have the endowment money. They have every professor. They have every. If we haven't seen that this year, we're never going to see it. Every freaking dean under their finger, and then they're using all of our tax money to weaponize and pay these students in ways. Not Charlie Kirk, the students themselves, to go harvest votes.
And I know that people listening to this are thinking, okay, so this is about as hopeless as anything I've ever heard. And it is if your hope is in the Republican infrastructure, because it barely exists. And philosophically, they don't like being in infrastructure. They want to go out and do their thing and live their life. They don't like government that much. They're up against people who worship government. But then there's another side to it. Republican people who have lots of money do not give lots of money into the political process. It's kind of against their religion. They think people should go to serve out of the goodness of their heart and take care of others less fortunate than them. They don't like the idea of writing $100 million of checks.
It feels like two wrongs make a right.
So they don't do it. And that's why they get hammered, particularly in this age of media, the way that it is. It's just the spending is crazy.
I'll give them credit. At least they're talking about it.
Yeah.
But, David, you don't give them any hope to be able to compete and do it better than the Democrats.
When the other side was spending $2 billion in a campaign in 2000, and this is now 2024, and you're talking about $100 million, what are the odds? I mean,
we got to get a cup of coffee in a second, but let's just cut to the chase. I don't even have stars by those two stories. The two that meant the most to me was the Arizona, rushing now to get abortion on the ballot there. They're trying to be like Florida. Now you're seeing abortion weaponized the way we saw COVID weaponized. that is a game changer and an outcome creator. And then you couple that with the story we did from Daily Signal, where they're using our tax dollars to take over campuses.
Well, that's the greatest irony of all. Charlie Kirk's getting $100 million, while Kamala Harris is talking about changing the federal work study program so they can have hundreds of millions of dollars. All right.
And it's to save democracy and to preserve democracy. But we know democracy is now Democrat candidates, the Democrat Party worldview and platform. So, I circle those two and I go, wow, the first two are really fighting things that were 4 to 12 years ago. And they are now, as I joked with you, I guess in 2028, we'll get to college campuses and we'll get to doing issues on ballots.
It's one thing to point out how bad it is. And that's a very irresponsible thing to do, to simply point out how bad it is. Even if it's funny, because you have to laugh because you can't cry. If there's no hope, then what's the use of even having the conversation? My experience in 44 years has shown this, and I think that our entire organization at the American Policy Roundtable would agree. They need about 100 times more money than people who are telling the truth, because it takes a lot of money to keep telling as many lies as they tell. The question isn't, are they going to be able to outspend truth-based enterprises 100 to 1? They always figured out how to do that. They need that money. But the power of the truth can never be conquered by the power of their money. The question is, are the people who know better doing their part? That's the point.
Yeah, well, that and time is not on their side. I mean, the border has blown up in their face. The economy has blown up in their face. The out-of-control spending has blown up in their face. The failures in foreign policy has everyone misbehaving. So enough time can pass. You don't have somebody charismatic like Barack Obama to make you want to believe something is counter to what is truth. But now they even have the bad results to go with it. But I think this is a good time for a coffee break, in the sense that my greatest hope doesn't come from, no one's bashing Charlie Kirk in any way. I'm just saying it doesn't come from his money and an app. I'm not living in fear and anger over what they're going to do in Arizona like they're doing already in Florida and did to you in Ohio, or worried about how they're going to use tax dollars to fix things in area campuses to make up for the failed black vote and Hispanic vote that they have since lost. My hope comes from a much bigger picture, and that is a historical view of America. Just when you think it's checkmate, somehow, some way, God finds a way for the right person at the right time to come in and take charge and lead us back to our intent. And I sense, against all of these odds, against all of these stories, that could be brewing again. And if it's not brewing yet, we got a little ways to go down a little bit before we get to that. But that's kind of where I get my hope. So I have no reasonable hope, but I have an experiential, through history, hope that America holds a special place in God's heart.
All right, we got to talk more about that.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. We don't data mine anyone or sell your information. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.